we're going to enable parents and administrators. When I say that, I'm thinking even schools. We're going to enable them to put their own content in there.
Mhm.
So if there's something as a parent that you really want to teach your kid, you'll have access to be able to easily get that information into the game itself.
In this episode, I'll be talking with Greech, a lifelong gamer who strongly feels that video games can be used to change education around the world. He's currently running the team behind the mechanical world of Dr. Gearbox, an upcoming e-learning game featuring RPG elements fused with a customizable curriculum. The game looks to position parents and other administrators to harness children's passion for video games and use it to teach them just about anything. What got you into developing the game?
So, so first of all, I've been a lifelong gamer. I'm 42. I started with like Atari or even whatever was before that, and I've just in and out of arcades as a kid. And I think when I was 10 years old, Nintendo came out. So I've always been a heavy, heavy, heavy game player, a video game player. I think what really started making me think that I needed to kind of get involved and actually and kind of invent something that doesn't exist yet is my own kids and watching them and how they're progressing in school, out of school, socially with their friends, the way media is changing, the way you could kind of just if you get in your car and you kind of look at the car next to you, there's kind of a kid in the back seat right now with a phone like this. And if you go to a restaurant, parents are trying to quiet their kids down, they give them a phone, or if you're on a plane, everybody's got like an iPad or something. So I'm poorly paraphrase this, but there was like a quote that I once heard, and it was like, humankind kind of moved forward by always kind of looking forward or with their head in the stars of like dreaming of what was next. And now humankind's kind of just like walking down the street, and I see this in Manhattan every day, like walking down the street, and everybody's kind of just like looking down at their phone now. Nobody's really dreaming anymore. Everybody's kind of just mesmerized in this zone of whatever it is that they're doing, entertainment or whatever. So when it came to my kids, I noticed that they're both really, really, really passionate about video games, like super passionate. So, my kid is got the headset on like you and I do right now, and he's playing Fortnite or whatever he's playing with his buddies, and they're just screaming, like at the top of their lungs. Like nothing's more fun for my kid than just screaming with his buddies at the top of his lungs and having the best time in the world. And
Mhm.
I saw that, and I started to see a few different things going on. First of all, he gets an allowance, right? So this is a long answer to your pretty direct question, but I
No,
think when
no
you put all these
problem.
things together, it kind of is going to start to make sense. He's a good kid. So both of my kids are good kids. They both do well in school. They both get allowances if they do all their chores, and they do them, right? Both of them 100% of the time opt to spend their money on in-game currencies of some kind for certain games. So the games may vary, and that's important too. So what happens is if the kid is going to get $10 a week, and we're not alone in this. The more I talk to other parents, this is a thing that's on the rise. You know, if it's $10 a week, that's $40 a month, right? And that's over $400 a year. That's just going towards these video game currencies, and they're buying whatever it is they're buying in these different games, right? Skins, or some games are pay to win, some games aren't. Depends on the game. But what captivated my attention was that when my 11-year-old was much younger, this was still a thing like 5 years ago or 6, 7 years ago, and
Mhm.
he used to play a game, Hero Up. It was a Marvel game that basically had all the regular Marvel characters, but they were like kind of miniature versions of themselves. And there was like a subscription, and if you paid whatever, like $5 or $10 a month or whatever it was, you got all sorts of access to like more currency that you can spend in game or certain characters or whatever the case may be. And at 11 years old, he doesn't really remember playing that game. And I remember it because I keep really, really, really good track of my own finances. I'm like, I know down to the penny where our money goes every month and every year, whatever. You can ask me a question and I could give you a clear answer. We spent $325 on that game over time, right? Over 2 years or whatever it was that he was playing it on and off. And he'll never go back to that again, right? He'll never play that game again. He almost doesn't even remember playing it. So that money is kind of out the window, right? And I look at the current situation that we're in, where all their allowance is going towards these different games, right? A lot of it is out the window. Like I love that he puts the headset on and he keeps in touch with his buddies, and they have to coordinate and be smart, right? And they have to play together to win. That's cool, right? That's social, and it's building relationships between these kids, and I love that. but I don't really know what else they're getting out of it. And some of, the premise themselves of like jumping out of a plane with your buddies and landing on an island and being the last ones to survive. Like, even there's a question there about like what are they really learning and what are they really being prepared for.
Mhm.
And I think my kids are, because they're learning from me. They can separate that kind of stuff from reality, and they're not going to wake up one day and decide to go to an island and gun down, right, 100 people. But
Mhm.
that was one of the things I noticed, right? They're really passionate about this stuff, and they're spending all their money on it. The money is irrecoverable, and one day they're going to stop playing whatever games they're playing, most likely, and that money will be gone, right?
Mhm.
And we're talking hundreds, and some parents were telling me, we can get into this. Like some parents are spending $80 or the $80, $90 a week. They were telling me, right? So there's a lot of money getting poured into these things, and some of these games that are free, the developers are making hundreds of $1 million a month on these in-game purchases. So that was the first thing. I thought screen time in general is on the rise, and I gave you a couple examples right there. And I'm not entirely sure what at least my kids were getting out of that,
Mhm.
right? And I don't think I'm alone there. As a
Mhm.
parent, I'm kind of dumping money into this phenomenon too, and I'm kind of like, what am I getting out of that? And then there's a third thing that was being cross-referenced with these two things, and that was my kids were in school and they were actually getting assigned video game homework. So there were educational games out there that the schools had adopted, and compared to all other types of homework, they both immediately would rather do the video game homework. Compared to sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil and paper and doing math, they'd rather play the video game math game. And in both cases, it seemed to me like they were learning, right? The same type of stuff. Either way, it didn't really matter. But they would never play one of those games against any AAA title that you could possibly name that they'd be allowed to play,
Of course.
right? So I guess what I learned there was the idea is genius. It's certainly not mine. There are trailblazers in the space of education technology, right? Ed tech and e-learning, and they had a brilliant idea years ago that we can gamify learning. But to me, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, it kind of feels like educators and teachers had put games together and not really game studios. So what you ended up with was a game like, yeah, it's game learning, but it doesn't hold water against any of the AAA titles that you're going to spend $60 for, right, in a store.
Mhm.
It You can't even put them next to each other. And when what I the kid will never be passionate about that video game learning game that they will about that game where they jump out of the plane with their buddies. And
Mhm.
that's where I think the education games miss, and that's where I thought the combination of these things, you've got kids increasing their screen time, which means they're more exposed to this type of stuff. You've got parents who are dumping money on it anyway in the situation, and you've got these ed tech games out there that aren't as good as regular video games, and that's where I saw the angle for us. If I could put a team together, we could make what I would consider the first educational game that is arguably as good as any of the AAA titles.
Right.
So that's really where this started. That's where this started last 15 months ago for us.
Sure, sure. And then that kind of developed and molded into the mechanical world of Dr. Gearbox. Now, where did that story kind of develop?
Yeah, that's so there's three founders. Our lead programmer who likes to stay behind the scenes, and then Etch, who you've met, Josh Larson, we call him Etch. He what I basically needed up front, I needed somebody to code this thing because I didn't know how to code. I needed somebody to draw some concepts because I can't draw. And that's where I found these two guys, and they ended up being the two other founders who are with me to this day. Uh, it didn't take long for us to figure out that we kind of had a bunch of different concepts on our hands, and one of them was kind of the old man. And the idea was the old man was an aged Indiana Jones who in his prior life was the same type of guy that Indiana Jones was, right? He was all over the world. Maybe everybody in the world didn't know who he was, but anybody in like the archaeological circles or whatever, they kind of know who this guy is. And
Mhm.
Dr. Jones was well known by certain people, not just by the kids who learned from him at school, but he wasn't world renowned where he was a household name, but people around the world did know him in certain circles. And we kind of patterned this guy as what happens to Indiana Jones when he's like 80 years old. As the pictures were being drawn, they kind of informed what the frame of, or structure of the story was going to be. We had these robots that Etch was drawing up, and then he drew some creatures, and we were like, all right, some of this stuff seems like it's explainable, some of this stuff seems like it's not explainable. And so he became Dr. Gearbox, and then we were like, okay, for him, he all of his stuff is mechanical, and that's where we kind of backed into like the mechanical world of Dr. Gearbox
Mhm.
was what he is and what he's about. And the game is very much about him and his creations, and a lot of it is about his past. So at 80 years old, we kind of backtrack, and we're still writing the story right now. So as I say this, some of this may not even be in the game, or some of this may be fleshed out. So we're just coming up with the ideas that we have 4 different real world zones. One of them, the first one, is Kerhonkson, New York, where when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time there. And we ended up making versions of that. We have a schoolhouse that was actually on the property where we had a trailer when I was a kid. So we had 10 acres and a trailer. And we lived in like this trailer on the weekends, and sometimes in the summers we would go up there. And in front of it, like an acre in front of it, was this old, old schoolhouse. And I showed it to our, our head of 3D, Eric Crosby, and I said, "Do you think you can make this schoolhouse? Like this is like this thing from my childhood." And I showed him pictures of me as a kid, like standing in front of it. And in a week, we had like the schoolhouse, and he built it. And it looks, if you were to take a picture and take the schoolhouse, they're identical. He does like such a good job, this kid.
Mhm.
So we started to realize we could tell the story of kind of Gearbox's past through this game. So I think the player is going to be retracing the steps of Gearbox. And what we're going to do is the game is going to have a campaign where our teacher Pete is crafting kind of like STEM lessons. So there's 10 levels per zone, and there's 4 zones that we're looking to launch for like the first version of the game, where
Mhm.
we call it minimum viable product to get on the market. The idea that will be in level 1, there's some kind of STEM lesson involved in the exploration of the game. And in level 2, there's another STEM lesson which kind of takes a little bit of what you learned in the first one. So by the time you get to level 40, you've kind of done all these different types of, lessons crafted by our teacher, and you use them in ways to help you progress as far as the storyline goes. In combination to that, really at heart, this game is a turn-based combat game. So if you're familiar with Final Fantasy or any of the games
Mhm.
like that, this game borrows a lot of those pioneers and a lot of those concepts from games like that. So what we've done differently is we've kind of put Who Wants to Be a Millionaire inside of Final Fantasy. So when you're playing the game, you have your party, right? And you can acquire any of the different types of creatures or robots or whatever that are in the game. But when it's your turn as the player, you get to make yourself. So when you play the game, you create yourself from scratch. We've got tons of different types of options that we're looking to put in the game. So before we end here, we should totally talk about our, kind of internal mandate for diversity and inclusion and what we think that should be like.
Yeah.
But the long story short is when you make your character and you get into these battles, when it's your turn, the game will ask you a question. And if you answer it correct, it'll ask you a second question. And if you answer that one correct, you get a third question. So anytime it's your turn, you get this series of questions. If you get them all right, the more you get right, the more powerful your spell becomes, and the greater chance of getting a better loot drop that becomes also. So you're basically incentivized to answer these questions right. And I think what we're going to have is for the campaign, these questions are directly related to Pete's STEM curriculum, right? That you'll find along the open world and the puzzles and unlocking Gearbox's past and all that kind of stuff. The story interwoven with the curriculum. Those questions will be directly related to that. But we're also going to have a mode where you can either just pick packages of questions that we can put in the, for example, on our store or directly in the game, depending, right? So if you're a parent, I think suddenly you get comfortable because if your kid says, "Hey, I want this," I'm making this up, this astronaut, set of armor. Well, that astronaut set of armor is going to come with, say, 50 astronomy questions, right? And as you answer them right, you unlock the parts of the armor until you can wear the full set. In order to wear the full set, you have to basically get educated on that topic. So as a parent, I now know, okay, if I'm going to spend this money right now, everywhere that I'm currently spending it, I don't really know where that money goes. But if I spend it on the mechanical world of Dr. Gearbox, I know my kid's going to get educated, right, on certain topics. And I think our big draw and what's most important for us is that we're going to enable parents and administrators. When I say that, I'm thinking even schools. We're going to enable them to put their own content in there.
Mhm.
So if there's something as a parent that you really want to teach your kid, you'll have access to be able to easily get that information into the game itself. So there are many ways that could play out, and one of them, like one quick example, would be if your kid has a geography test coming up, and you know what's going to be on the test, you could put that information that's going to be on the test at school into our game. So again, it's kind of like comparing the dining room table or the kitchen table experience. Maybe your kid will just opt to play the game. If kids are so passionate about video games, my gamble here, right, or my hypothesis is they'd rather play the video game. And in doing so, they'll be exposed to the same material that they would be normally studying in different ways or other ways to
Mhm.
pass their test. So if you're a kid, you're probably much more willing to play the game because you know it's going to give you more experience, it's going to level up your character, all the reasons why you normally play games. That feeling of I need to play it or I have to play it. If I miss today, I'm going to miss one of these challenges and I have to log in every single day because that's how these games are. They give you reasons to come back in there and keep playing them, right? So what we're trying to do is if you're going to be doing that, why don't we use this as an opportunity to teach our kids, right?
Mhm.
And this isn't a my kids in my house type of thing because the more families and parents that I talk to, this idea really, really, really resonates, especially
Right.
the idea that they could put in their own stuff, right? Because
Yeah.
it's not just limited to what I think third grade math should be or
For
fifth
sure.
grade language arts or whatever.
For
At that
sure.
point, it just becomes whatever you need your kid to learn.
Mhm. Mhm. So, have you seen a positive response to the game in the communities?
Yeah. So that's a really so we're learning too, by the way, right? So
Mhm.
we're this is a first time for a lot of people on the team. Some people on the team are veterans in the industry, right? Our 3D guy has been doing 3D and he knows how to make models, for example. You know, our programmers know how to program. I had never put together a company before. I had certainly never put together a team that's at this rate that's growing at this size. So I also am no marketing expert. So what we were doing was we were making a lot of posts on social media and we were boosting them on Facebook. And on the first, I would say on the first day of our Facebook, because we announced it to all our friends and family, we probably had about 200 to 225 followers on Facebook on
Mhm.
day one. I would say that was probably in March, and in August, we had like 235 or 240. So we gained like 15 or 20 followers by boosting these posts. Then I met with an expert in the field, this guy Justin Evergreen, and he walked me through how to effectively get my information in front of the right people. So he had me write up this what he called a founder story, and it was like this big. And it was something that I thought that nobody in the world would ever want to read because it was so long. And I'm like, Justin, I got to tell you, this thing, just people are gonna look at this thing and look at the size of it. Nobody reads an ad like that in Facebook. They would never do something like that. And he goes, if you get that in front of the right people, you'll be surprised who are going to care. So he also taught me how to get this information in front of the right people. And we put an ad out and we got it in front of the right people and it was this big and some people were commenting like making fun of my haircut, making fun of my sweater, and a lot of people just wrote too long, didn't read, and we also gained like 2,000 followers in a week. So that was you had some element of people who just looked at us like exactly how you thought they were going to look, but he was right. If you tell your whole story and really why it's so meaningful and what matters, and you get it in front of the right people, they're gonna react to that, and they did. I had to shut the ad down because I had so many emails in my inbox from concerned parents around. It was at the time I was only advertising in the U.S.
Mhm.
and people were just saying, "I 100% completely agree with you. Where do I sign up?"
Yeah.
So what we did was we created a focus group. So we have our general follower population on Facebook, and that grows as time goes on. And then we have people who want to test the alpha and the beta, and that's critical. That was part of our agreement up front as founders. We didn't want to just make a game and throw it out there. We wanted to make a game with the target audience hand in hand,
Mhm.
right? Because so many times you get a game today, or even when you watch a movie, or like whatever it is that you do, and there's always a little bit of you that's like, wow, I wish they would have done this, or I wonder why they did it like that. We're actively getting the requirements from the people that we want to sell the game to.
Mhm.
So we have a whatever 30 families right now, parents, kids, a combination. Some people just want to test a video game. It was pretty cool. So we have a bunch of people in a private Facebook group, and we can ask them, what topics do you think your kids should learn? And the answers are brilliant, like fiscal responsibility, right? Came right out of it. And it's kind of some stuff that you don't see in school as much or anymore, right?
Mhm.
Like if for example, they don't teach script in school anymore, at least not where my kids go. So, but that was the thing. Like everybody had to learn script when I was a kid. So some parents want to still see script in the world.
Mhm.
But I think it was more about like values, and then there was some straight up stuff like, yeah, I just want my kid to be better at math. And I think there's a lot of games out there that make you better at math already. I think where it's important to us is to hit all these other subjects and kind of include them in a way that I think that's better for us to
Mhm.
have a one stop shop where you can get all of these different topics out there. But yeah, the response has been very, very, very validating. And quite honestly, this is a scary endeavor, right? It's got to get funded from somewhere. Right now, I'm funding the whole thing by myself. That's a pretty terrifying place to be.
Mhm.
I saved. I was always really good, as I mentioned before. I was pretty good with finances, and I learned. I had family, friends, or even my dad or my mom always told me pretty much save half of what you get as much as you can. And I
Mhm.
did that my whole life. And I'm 42. I didn't. I don't have millions of dollars, but I had enough to start to put my kids through college, and that's what I decided to use. I said, you know what, I'm gonna this money that I have sitting there, instead of using it in 10 years when they start to go to school, because God only knows how much school's even going to be by then, I thought, I think this is such a worthy exercise that if I can get this off the ground, I'll make my money back, first of all. But we could change the way that, things are going right now between games and education. So, we kind of have this joke. Imagine that you go to school and your teacher says, okay, tonight for homework, get together with your classmates on level 3 and go beat the boss, right? And that's when you go home and you'll see the the curriculum that your teacher puts in the game that they want you to learn, that is in the game. There's no reason why that can't happen, because my kids are getting assigned homework in video games today,
Mhm.
right? So I know it's a thing that's actually happening. And these are all the different reasons why we thought we can actually start moving this thing forward and getting it done.
For sure. So, what is something that maybe as you started that you wish you would have known as you kind of developed this, and maybe it's reaching out to those teachers, maybe it's reaching out to the community.
That's a great question. One thing was, I didn't realize that Etch, who signed on to draw pictures, was capable of doing practically anything asked. So that would have been good to know up front. I don't think he knew either. But right now, a really good example. And this is a weird answer. You probably weren't expecting this answer, right? To, One of the co-founders was brought on to just draw pictures, and at this point, I would say he probably works like 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last 15 months on this. This is like his job. And he is now rigging characters in the game. He made all of our particle effects. He built our website. It, it if I would have known that up front, I think we would have been able to plan better, because I had hired and spent money in many different ways leading up until this point. And what was happening was we would hire a person to do something that we needed done, and then they would do it, and he would go, I could have done that. And it turns out that he could have. He actually could, because everybody thinks they could do a lot of stuff. We actually got a guy that actually can do a lot of stuff, and that was pretty shocking. So at this point, I feel bad for him, because anything that has to get done, I'm throwing at him first.
Mhm.
And I'm just so now he and I are working on the trailer for the game with a video editor out of Prague, this guy, a dad, is a really cool dude, and he's gonna put together our trailer, because in order to get our game on Steam, you have to have a trailer. Plus,
Mhm.
every game needs a trailer, right? So, uh, arguably, Edge could have made the trailer, right? He could even do that. The thing is, his computer is too slow, and that's the only thing holding him back at this point.
Mhm.
And also, you have to think when you bring in experts, like yourself, for example, right? Like, sure, we could probably do voices ourselves, but they're never going to sound like the Botley will never have sounded if we did it the way Botley sounds when you do it.
Right.
So, like sometimes you still have to defer to experts, but there were a lot of things that to me, didn't really feel like that, especially because we use the Unity game engine. The thing is super powerful. It's really very powerful. And there's a lot of resources to get good at things online, YouTube's and all sorts of ways to learn about it. So yeah, I was paying like what I now realize was way astronomically high prices for
Hmm.
stuff that he could have done himself quickly and for way cheaper, right? Because
Hmm.
he's invested, he's part of the team, and he's going to be here for good. So he's certainly not charging me what a specialist to do something would charge me. So that was one part of it for sure. Um, I don't think in general I never really understood the scope that goes into doing something like this. There are solo indie devs out there that do the whole thing by themselves, and that is pretty mind-boggling. Because at this point, this game we've got over 20 people at any time in and out, right, working on it,
Hmm.
just all different aspects. Uh, so that's something that I really didn't anticipate up front. So when I budgeted up front, I did not think about stuff like this, right? Totally didn't think about all the different amounts of people and what it would really take. And, the game itself too. And I know this too, because, I've worked in the software business before. You got to be careful of what's called scope creep. The initial idea of the game is certainly not the idea of the game now, right? We probably could have released the original idea of the game already.
Hmm.
The idea grew and grew and grew, and we have to be able to stop that and just release something.
Right.
Right? I don't think I'm the only one who runs into this. So those were a couple things, but there was I really thought that the parents would really care. That hasn't gone away. We knew up front, if we do this right, people will care.
Right. Now, speaking of caring, what does your family, your wife specifically, kind of feel about this venture you're tracking?
So first of all, I have a regular full-time job, right? This is my second full-time job. So arguably I work 80 hours any week, and most of what my family sees is my back, right? They'll come in from that door and they'll see me sitting over here and they'll have to get the headphones off of me and get my attention. Uh, Also, the money spend is pretty much our life savings, right? So there's a lot of things there. I have to say my wife has been phenomenally supportive. My kids too. My kids test the game and they absolutely love it. But this is something that like these types of things can wreck a family. And
Mhm.
no, my wife's been there every single step of the way. She's been with me. There are days when I was just like, I have to rethink this because I can't get to the point where I spend every penny we ever had. Because then what do I do? Right?
Right.
Then I'm borrowing money or whatever the case may be. And she, at no time was she ever like, yeah, you got to rethink this. At any time ever, she was like, no, you know what you're doing. This is what you're gonna do, and just keep doing it. So yeah, she's been absolutely amazing through this whole process.
That's awesome. I think just having a good support is, I think, great for any creator. Um, because yeah, we can get in our heads and start doubting ourselves. And having that backup support, especially from family, kind of help us uh,
Yeah,
continue moving forward with our endeavors.
yeah.
So that's awesome. That's awesome that you have such a good support system. Now, you mentioned uh, the different experience levels and bringing on different creators and stuff like that. Uh, One thing I want to touch on is what has your experience been like when you started adding voices to the characters in the game?
Yeah, so it's interesting because what we're trying first of all, we're trying to go for PC, Nintendo Switch, and mobile. A PC and Mac, I should say.
Mhm.
Nintendo Switch and mobile. And you almost don't know what you can get into these different mediums, right? So PC we know we could do a whole lot with.
Mhm.
Nintendo Switch we know we could do a ton with. I'm curious still when it comes to mobile, what we can and what we can't get away with as far as performance goes and just girth and download sizes and all these different types of things.
Right.
So voices, up front, we were like, wouldn't it be great if we had them? Especially because, and this is really important. Ultimately, we're thinking pretty big. We're not just thinking about a video game here. We're thinking about like, you see this sometimes like a phenomenon where it's like toys and bed sheets and movies and Netflix series. There's really a whole lot we could do with this little universe that we're creating right here. And to do that, you do have to have voice, right? To get that, that's another dimension that you can't be lacking
Mhm.
is, or just music in general or audio and of course voice and voice acting. So it's added, I would say, like a 25% extra dimension onto our characters, right? When you have a character, and we're learning this as you play video games, take a lot of things for granted. When
Mhm.
you build video games, you're going, oh, okay, I need a 3D model first of all, and it's got to have a skin on it, which is like the different colors and textures and all that, and it's got
Mhm.
to be rigged with bones, and then it has to be animated, and that's all your 3D guy or different 3D guys, they could do all that.
Mhm.
um, and then when they, in our case, when they cast a spell, well, we need the particle systems that or the actual spell moving through space and time, right? So there's another person who's working on that. And then when you put those two things together, well, shouldn't it sound like something? They're generating magic, right? You don't watch Harry Potter and he goes like this with the wand, right? Or you don't watch Star Wars and the stormtrooper takes a shot. You see something, you hear something. So
Mhm.
now there's sound effects there. And yeah, the voice became important because it adds the character to the characters, right? We have Mandeville or Rock Goblin, right? Those voices are, I can't imagine those characters without the voices that you put on those guys. When Rock Goblin does the like an ogre, he stomps his feet. That is like, it just cracked. When my kids first heard that, and that's, you mentioned before the doubts that we could have. There have been nights where I just woke up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh my God, I'm blowing my life savings and I'm ruining my family's life forever.
Mhm.
And the things that where it comes back, where I feel more comfortable, when my kid first saw Rock Goblin in our alpha build of the engine, and he saw him stomp his feet, and he saw the particles come up from the ground, and he heard the sounds that he made when he stomps his feet, my 7-year-old thought it was the coolest thing ever, right? And it became just like any other big time game for him at that point. And that's what I knew. Those are the little things. You have to have all these little pieces. And
Mhm.
voice was critical. It was super critical. And I think it's going to be more critical. You know, those characters are kind of in the background, but we've got characters like Botley, right? Who's going to be your tutorial and he's going to walk you through the game.
Mhm.
We've got to have voice. We've got to have him. These days, there's not a there's a lot of games have full voice. Period,
Mhm.
right? You're not reading anything. It used to be like when you play World of Warcraft or something, you do a quest log jumps up, and you read this whole paragraph. It's hard for a 5-year-old to read a whole paragraph. Most of them can't read 5 words. So, how do you engage a community, especially with our audience is weird. Kids aren't on social media, right? Their parents are. So we've got to draw the parents in. We've got to get the kids in with them. Once a kid shows up, they're not going to want to read all this different stuff. So we're going to have Botley talking to them. And so it's a core component. Voice is a core component for that character. And if we really want to do what we always said we wanted to do from the start, if we want to have a compelling story with Gearbox and a sense of loss, and we've decided over time that he's going to have the onset of Alzheimer's. So he's kind of an aged Indiana Jones who can no longer run from the boulder and do all that kind of stuff. And he's forgetful. So I
Mhm.
don't know if we're going to bang it over people's heads like, this is how you deal with Alzheimer's, right? I don't think it's going to be like that at all. But he's just going to be forgetful. And to give him life, you you can't read that. We have to
Right.
act that, right? And for his granddaughter Jessica, who's in the game, she's going to need a voice. These characters are going to need to interact and feel like they're really there, because if we're going to create a game that kids love but that parents get stuck playing games with kids, like I play the Lego games with my kids all the time.
Mhm.
It's what they want to play, so I'm playing it with them. You got to cater to everybody who's behind a controller or behind the keyboard. So
Right.
I think for parents, having a pretty cool emotional story in there, where it's not over the top and it makes the game too heavy, but it gives the characters a sense of depth, right?
Mhm.
Again, it comes back to the voice. You need good animations, you need a lot of those good things, but you need to hear it, right? And you need to see the facial expressions, and
Right.
that's like that kind of human element that I think we can't live without.
Right. And speaking of when you showed your kids the Rock Goblin and the Mandeville, my daughter was in the room watching me voice the Rock Goblin, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, you have." She's she was 4 at the time. You need to show me, and I'm like, "Honey, it's not put together." I just and so once it was finished, I showed her and and
Right.
I mean, again, it was magical. She's like at that point she didn't even know it was me voicing it. She's like, "I want to see that little guy again." But
Right. And
that
that's a really, really, really important point. That's one we have a lot of different kind of goals. I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, but one of them is we want to bring parents and kids into the game development process. And I think when you're a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a policeman, or I want to be a baseball player, right? Because they could see those. And to me, the video game industry, and there's nothing wrong with those things, but the video game industry, depending on your source, I always read the quote, it makes more than movies and music combined, right?
Mhm,
So there's tons of career opportunities and jobs in this industry. And one of the things that we try to do, and if you go look at our website and you go dig back through the blog, we're trying to teach kids how to be a 3D modeler or how Etch goes about drawing his pictures. And the idea that you can show a kid, this is how I wrote and created the voice of this character. That's the kind of stuff we really want to do.
mhm,
We would love to have that on our website, right? Because we want to show kids around. We want somebody to ask their kid, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And the kid be like, "Oh, a voice actor," right? Like you could show kids. To me, when you expose 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds to this world this behind the scenes world, they may start coding at a much younger age, or they may start making silly voices or serious voices or whatever at a really young age. And think about it, like we all went to college to get good at whatever it is that we did in life. And
mhm,
in many cases, what we learned in college was thrown out the window when we got to our real job, right? Art school may be a little bit different. I feel like if you go to voice school, that's a pretty good, that'll help you get jobs in the voice acting field.
right,
But
right,
like, if you go to school for business and just get a job in finance, I got a job that was so specialized, nothing in the world could have possibly geared you up for that. To the point where I made an app that taught you how to do it because I was just like, there's no resource, no college for it. So to me, if you start teaching kids this stuff at a very young age, those are the people. Like, think about the piano, right? Think about somebody who starts playing piano at 25 years old, right? Yeah, they can get good, but think about the person who started playing piano at 3 years old or 4 years old. And I've always had that idea. Like, I like ice hockey. I tried to put my kid on the ice at 2 years old. He played for a year and hated it, and we stopped. But a lot of kids didn't. So I realized that I learned this because when I started playing hockey, I was 13. So I had to work so unimaginably hard to get serviceable. And there were kids that have been doing it. Like, learning to ice skate's no joke. Playing a sport on ice skates is not easy.
mhm,
The kids that were doing it since they're 3 had a major advantage, right? A major, major age advantage. And that's what made me think about this kind of stuff. Like, if we teach kids about what's behind the scenes in video game development, when they get older, they'll be good at this stuff going into those trade schools, right? Going to Full Sail or the art schools. And for us, there's ways we could do that. I was thinking about like a bedtime story, or like the making of our game. And
mhm,
every night you sit down with your kid, and then there's a couple pages on Christian and what he did with the voice, and a couple pages on, I was even like, we should be teaching them the the accounting of it, how
mhm,
I balance the books, even this boring stuff. Some people must think marketing's super fun. Like, marketing takes away from my time of being in Unity, right? Or doing the accounting in QuickBooks takes my time away from being in the engine. So,
mhm,
but I think you need to know you needed somebody to do this, and you needed somebody to do this, and this person did these 5 things. I think that would be a really cool book to read to a kid.
for
I think
sure.
they would look at that book and pick something out and be like, "Oh, you know what? I want to draw pictures, or I want to do 3D, or I bet you I could do animate a 3D." Like, some people are just animators; they
Right,
never build a model.
right.
So just there's a lot there. There's a lot there, and I think that's an awesome story that your daughter was with you when you recorded that.
What is some advice that you might want to give to someone wanting to start a game or wanting to venture in an e-learning kind of game?
I think what I've been doing is you have to know what you're really good at. I am not really good at building video games. I am really good at finding the right people to do anything. It doesn't have to be a video game. If you gave me a task, uh, I could source the right people to get that done. And that's why I knew I'd be able to get this done, because I knew I'd be able to construct what we're really trying to do here. Because truthfully, what we haven't discussed yet is we're trying, if we could get to the point where we can raise a significant amount of money, we don't want to keep it, right? Which is the weirdest thing in the world. And as I talk to different investors, some people just like walk away as soon as I start talking like this. But I mentioned before, some of these games are free to play, but they make hundreds of millions of dollars a month. Now, I don't know, think we'll ever get that far, but imagine if we did. I don't know what we would do with that other than try to help people who need it, right? There's a difference between keeping your studio funded and keeping everybody employed and having really good health benefits and giving everybody, you know, fair pay or even above market pay. But like what we would, I don't really, if I lived the rest of my life doing something like that, I don't know what I would be thinking when, on my deathbed, for
Mhm.
to get morbid for a second. What I would really like to look back and see is like, hey, we helped kids get insulin that couldn't afford it, or we helped kids get wheelchairs that couldn't afford it, or we changed the way that kids learned. I especially like the idea of helping fund charities. And we've got this idea that we can partner with charities. And I know we're completely sideways. I'll go back to your question, but the idea is that we could partner with charities, put their content in our game, and then when a parent, say the kid, yeah, I'm just using this as a wild example, but imagine that we partnered with like the ASPCA. You could put like a dog armor set in the game, and a kid that wants that dog armor set, say the parents pay the whatever it's going to be, $5 or $10, whatever that number is, right? The kid gets the dog armor set. They've got to answer a bunch of questions that have to do with the ASPCA to unlock it, and then the idea would be that a portion of that money, maybe a significant portion of that money, goes back to the ASPCA, right? Right off
Mhm.
the bat. So as a parent, I'm comfortable because hey, I'm passionate about the ASPCA, and my kid's going to be learning about it, and my kid is happy because they want the dog armor set, right? The ASPCA thought up dog armor set. The only way for them to get it is to answer the questions. So it's like a pretty cool cycle of the kid gets what they want, the kid learns a bunch about a charity that their parents may care about. The parent can feel good. It always goes back to the parent feeling good about spending money. I don't feel super good about the money that I spent today because it's just going to these companies and I don't know where it goes after that. And my kid's not really getting anything out of it. But okay, my kid's learning. One of my favorite charities is getting a huge chunk of cash out of this. Like this seems like a good way to spend my disposable income as
Mhm.
far as video games go on my kids.
I want to play off of what you're talking about in terms of the wheelchairs and stuff like that. I know that you have the ability for the player to craft their character with anything from alopecia to having a
Right.
wheelchair, prosthetic limbs. Where did this diversity and this development kind of start?
It's funny. I'm not directly exposed to too much of that on a daily basis. So it wasn't like I saw something over and over again that made me feel like I like this is something we have to do. It was almost a math game in my head. I just thought that there were a lot of kids that are this is where it started. There were just a lot of kids that are in a wheelchair, right? And what you learn from what I've learned over time is people with disabilities or in certain situations really tend to gravitate towards video games, especially online video games, because they can kind of not have the limitations that they may have in real life. But at the same time, I thought, isn't it pretty messed up that like we force a kid who's in a wheelchair to play as a character that runs around? Because they can't, they may not be able to. So that's where it started. I said, I asked our programmer, how hard would it be to just have a wheelchair as an option? And he was like, that's not hard. And my first question was, well, why don't we see it all the time? Because there's a significant portion, at least here in the US, is a significant portion of our society. It has a disability of one form or another. And I'm like, I wonder why that was never thought about. And it just got so easy from there. I was like, okay, well, what about vitiligo, right? Some people have different color skins, right? And like, we shouldn't just have different shades of skin that people would normally be, quote unquote. Why not have the ability to have, off the run type of skin patterns? That was simple for us to do. And then it got to the point where like I started asking parents, like, what do you want to see in the game? And somebody just mentioned, like, yeah, my kid has two different color eyes. That was like very simple for us to do. And then one parent said, my kid can't grow hair. And that was easier for us to do than making hair, having the option to be bald.
Mhm.
right? It was so easy. And again, I go back to these games like, why isn't this in every single game? It was free for us to do. And then we got the really cool one, which was a hearing implant. So it's like something that goes on your ear, and then there's like a wire that goes to like this,
Mhm.
disc on the side of your head. And then it became fun. Like we should we should just be the game that allows anything you could think of, right? So yeah, we have to build it first. A parent the other day gave me a really cool one. She was like, my daughter's 4, and she's just learning that she has a feeding tube, but most people don't. So could you have like an option for a feeding tube? And I was like, yeah, that's just another. To me, it's just another 3D model. But for a kid to have that option where they don't normally have it, I think that's huge for us as and what we're trying to do here. But I think we're trying to make a statement that this should really be. So yeah, that's so we just put it under the flag of diversity and inclusion. And what we're really trying to say is, I only draw the line at what's hateful. So other than that, I don't know. I just think that it's cool. I think that what makes people different is the coolest part, right?
Mhm.
So you should be able to for our game, you should be able to construct something ridiculously unique, right? And it would be interesting to find some kids using the hearing aid or the hearing implant and have no hearing issues in real life, but just think it's a cool thing to have on their character,
Right.
right? Or whatever the case may be, or to have a vitiligo skin pattern just because it's there and it's an option and they could do it, or different color eyes, or whatever that we come up with. So
But
kind of exposing kids to something that they may not be exposed to.
right, but that also kind of teaches them about the differences of, say, vitiligo. Because yeah, you see it occasionally, but you don't, like you said, you're not exposed to it, so you don't understand necessarily what it is. But having a character that has vitiligo kind of informs the kid that this is normal,
That's a hundred
and
percent right.
and it kind of teaches them about, say, a disease someone has, or just a genetic pattern that is different.
And a really good example is we named our character Jessica in the game after this woman Jessica Cox, who was born with no arms but got her pilot's license. So she flies planes with her feet. And I was like, that, and that's a this these are like normal stories, right? So in our game, you mentioned the prosthetics. Our character Jessica is born with one arm, and again, we just want to expose kids and show them this is totally normal, right? And you're
Mhm.
going to run into this every day. And when you're young, you kind of absorb these different types of things, and you don't want it to be like, well, I don't want to be that person's friend because they've got like a weird lip, or they've only got one arm, or whatever the case may be. I feel the more we can jam into this experience, the more it does become normal. And even to the extent where like we do have Dr. Gearbox kind of forgetful, there's a lot of kids out there that have grandparents that have the onset of Alzheimer's, and they're experiencing this. And this is kind of familiar to certain kids and may even help them deal with it. We're trying to, we haven't written the script out yet, but we're trying to do these things in a tasteful way that helps kids cope with real life situations like that.
Right. So where can people go to find more about Dr. Gearbox so we can follow up on it?
So our website is gearboxgame.com. I would say we're still trying to get everything up and running because we're a small studio. I think that the place that has the most information is Gearbox Game on Facebook.
Mhm.
So that's where I would say we try to post 3 times a week. And we try to do a feature Friday where we kind of show something new that we made, or especially characters. We're Dr. Gearbox on Twitter. We're Gearbox Game, I think, on Instagram and Facebook. So we have to get our YouTube up and running, which it's ironic that YouTube we've used the least, but it's the most one of the most powerful.
Right.
So video, I think, really speaks a lot. So we do really need to get on top of that. But yeah, following us on Facebook, first of all, it's a big help to us because if you're following us, we are in the process of trying to get some investors. It helps to be able to say we've got thousands of people following us. So that's a green light to investors that it's not just some crazy idea that we've got in our heads, or a dream that we're chasing. There's people out there that think this is interesting.
Right.
So yeah, Facebook is probably the best way. Like I said, what we really want to do is just position parents to be able to have their harness their kids passion for video games and teach them. And I kind of explained it to my mom one day, and I was like, when was the last time any of your grandkids or any of us as your kids were like at the kitchen table and we were just screaming like this doing homework? You know, they just there is no, there's not many people that are that passionate about education. And I feel that this is a medium to get to harness kids' passion and really teach them in the process. So the
Right.
fact that we're going to make it customizable so parents can put their own information in there, or you know, really we want to get to the point where we partner with schools or even whole school districts or states. We want to make this as big as possible. We
Mhm.
want to get to the point where schools can administer curriculum to their kids this way in addition to the other ways that they're already doing it.
Right.
So when you have when you have a math test for Mrs. Smith's third grade math class, you're seeing the same information in this game. Because right now what kids do is like, okay, you get home from school, most parents have the rule, do all your homework, then we're going to check it together. If everything's right, then you can play video games. But to a kid, it's like, what if playing the video game was doing your homework? That's the thing we're trying to really get to and solve here.
Right. Right.
So really, yeah, that's really it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and thank you for telling me and talking about the game.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Slate with guest Greech. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell button to stay notified. I look forward to seeing you again.
I locked my family in a room, told them not to come out for an hour.
Feel about.
I see you. So, when we do stuff like that, I'm sorry, what was the original question? I know I just completely went like